And you're all set, Dan. Go for it.
Right. Just gonna open up my chat window and get that lined up here so I can see that. Yeah, so if we're ready, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome here to Reimagining Your Course with AI, some best practices for the modern classroom. My name is Dan Barancata, and I'll be with you today kind of working through this topic. I currently serve as a professor at Western Governors University in the Educational Technology and Instructional Design program, and I work with SUNY CPD in the Instructional Design Certificate program as well as working at SUNY GCC as an adjunct instructor, where I formerly served as an instructional designer as well. And I always take an opportunity to show off my little girls there whenever I get a chance. So that's Gianna. She's 7 months now, so a little bigger than that picture. And Ariana is about 3.5, and my wife Alexa. And so I just like to show the little ones off because they're always here and around and keeping me busy, but loving every second of that. It's always good to show them off when I can. What we'll talk about today and in this next little bit, it's obviously a quick session. So I want to kind of go through a few different ideas that I think are really important to think about in the broader context of what we're going to be talking about. So I'm going to touch on these things. I'm not going to be able to get in super depth with it, but I will share some resources at the end that you can learn a little bit more on. And if you're interested in continuing the conversation, beyond this presentation, I'm always happy to do that as well. You can always connect with me and I'll share some information on that. So as we go, we're going to talk about thinking of our modern learners and what those modern learners are and what they need, how we can think about designing with empathy as we work through this process of iterative design and what that means. We'll touch on universal design for learning and some key components of that to help us get into using AI. And we'll talk a little bit about prompt engineering and some tips there for how to use this and also what we can use it for. What are some practical uses of AI to help us reimagine our courses? And I think all of these flow into that. Obviously, each of these bullet points, we could probably spend, plenty of time on just them as a single presentation or a single topic or even longer than that. So I'm going to try to go through and highlight some key points, but definitely plenty to think about beyond what we're going to get to just today. And again, if you have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat as we go. I'll try to monitor that as best I can, and we will have a few minutes at the end also for some questions and answers. So as we get into this, I think it's important to just kind of think about, if we want to use AI and we want these new tools and we want to sort of, design and update and reimagine our courses and make them better, who are we doing that for? And I think that's an important thing to think about. So, I always think it's really important that we're empathizing with our modern learners and who our modern learners are. They're different than the way that we learned, than the way that maybe we started off teaching, the way we were doing it, certainly 10, 15, 20 years ago, but even 2 and 5 years ago, a lot has changed and we want to be aware of that. And how we think about education is evolving as well. And I love this George Couros quote, I highly recommend him as an author for all educators. But the idea here is that there's a clear need for education. Just like in business, without innovation, organizations cease to exist. And if educational leaders refuse to evaluate and stay in touch with students' needs, schools will fail just like businesses that don't keep up with the changing customer needs. So, thinking of our students as sort of that customer standpoint and how can we provide for them? What do they need? What do they want? What do they expect? That's going to help guide us in everything that we do. And I always like to use a shopping analogy when I'm kind of talking through this. If we think about, how we used to primarily shop and buy things, think about our holiday shopping that's going to be coming up, back again 15, 20, 30 years ago, that always entailed a trip to the mall and probably going into those big box stores like J.C. Penney and Bon-Ton and Sears and Macy's, where you had to drive to the store and that one store was set up for all of the shoppers and everybody had to walk in the same door and had access to the same goods and services and products and colors and styles, and the store was laid out the same and in the same sort of order and fashion. And the folks running those stores tried to put it together as best they could to make a store that would fit for all of the shoppers and have the types of things there that they were interested in. But it was a very sort of store centered approach, right? We're kind of focused on how do we put together this best one size fits all store. And that led to plenty of problems, right? It was, that extra step of going there. If we had to make returns, we know how how hassle that used to be, the trouble that returns used to be. And, sometimes you might get some good deals, sometimes you might strike out and not find anything there that you're looking for. But we're all kind of stuck when the store was open, the same days and times that might not work for our schedule, all those drawbacks of going to shop in the store. Where now we so much more rely on online shopping, and really specifically Amazon, because with Amazon they've really cornered the market because it's all about the user experience, and it's 24/7. It's access when you need it. It has what you want, what you're looking for. It helps sort of promote and prompt you towards other similar products or things that'll go with that, and it's all about your individual experience. So when we log on to Amazon, it always looks different for all of us because it's tailored to your needs and your desires and what you're looking for. And the way we've shopped has also changed the way we learn and engage with resources and the news and media and social media and all these things that are going on with the rise of technology. That's what our modern learners have really grown up on and come to expect. And if that's what they expect from shopping and from social media and quick access and the phones and all those things, you can bet they're going to assume that's going to carry over into every other facet of their life, education being, included in that process. So we want to think of that as sort of the expectation that our students have for us, and sort of designed for that. Because again, what do our modern learners want? They really want those personalized learning experiences where there's some flexibility there in how they're going to engage with material and demonstrate their learning as well. They like the idea of using learning technologies, but also that adaptive learning process where they're able to engage with different technologies at different paces that are, sort of catered to their styles and their needs. And the use of technology, whether it's the smartphones or specific tools, apps, platforms that we can use to help enhance their learning experiences. Again, we've come a long way from paper and pencil and textbooks. We're sort of beyond that, and even through social media, now we're really into the more TikTok age, where we're down to, like, you've got to catch people's attention in a matter of a few seconds if we're going to keep them. We don't have minutes, let alone hours anymore. So, be aware of those types of things, and which leads us into that idea of engaging in interactive content, right? Our students are going to expect that. Think about the way, we're marketed goods and services, the way social media works, the way the news is operating now. All of these things are sort of quick, get me what I need, when I want it, when I need it. We don't wait for the newspaper to come out tomorrow morning anymore. We get that news right away as it's happening in real time. And it's interactive, and we can move through it, and we're prompted with similar stories and things like that. So throughout the process of everything we're engaging in, it is engaging, it is interactive, and it is quick. Inclusivity and diversity is also important, and we want to make sure we're celebrating those things within our courses, and we're providing diverse perspectives, but we're also allowing our students to demonstrate their learning in diverse ways, in ways that they're comfortable with, and ways that they feel confident in demonstrating what they know. Because at the end of the day, it's about the content and testing and assessing their knowledge, skills, and abilities as it relates to the content, not so much their ability on a particular type or style of assessment. We want to make sure, accessibility is important always for all of our students, whether it's the students that have documented accommodations and things of that nature, or just the student that maybe hasn't disclosed a potential exceptionality in your course. You can rest assured that folks are there, and that they'll benefit from those things. And I always use the example, I showed my young girls, I like to watch videos sometimes on my phone, but if they're sleeping and I happen to be around them, I am reading the closed captions all the time and watching those videos, without the noise and the volume on. And it's not because I have a hearing impairment, but it's because that suits my needs better. Having those closed captions there help from an accessibility standpoint for those that might have a hearing impairment or an auditory issue. But for me, it helps me just because I've got a couple young kids here and I don't want to listen or watch with the volume up. So I'll just read those closed captions. So we're making our courses better when we think about accessibility there. And then also the idea of feedback in continuous improvement? How can we provide feedback to our students and assessments that give them the opportunity to continuously improve? And this is what our learners expect. And I think all of these things we can really sort of address through AI best practices, and AI, is a clear tool to help us address these and reimagine our courses. And when we're doing all this, I think again, a focal point here is, can we design with empathy in mind? How can we create these learning experiences to be truly that, experiences for our students to learn, and for them to learn in ways that are going to be, influential to them and helpful for them, which is sort of a connectivist approach to instructional learning. How can we kind of put the dots out there for our students, but allow them to connect those dots in ways that are meaningful to them, which is going to be different pathways and different pacing and different times. And, each student is different, and we want to recognize that and understand that, and provide them what they need, not what we need. So when we're designing with empathy, there's real power in that, right? Can we sort of challenge ourselves to see things from the perspective of our learners? It's not, again, what we know to be true, or the way that we learn something, or the way that we think is the best way to do this, but what do our students want? What do they need? What's going to engage them? What's going to help them through this process? And, oftentimes when we're putting courses together, things seem so obvious to us, but remember, that's because it's our ideas, it's our thoughts, we're designing it, or we're the subject matter expert. We've been doing it for longer and have that experience. Again, put yourselves in the shoes of a new learner, a new student in this course. What's obvious to us may not be to others. And thinking about, is this still the best way to do something? Our students are different today than when we were at that same point in the journey. So we want to make sure we're sort of updating and changing and evolving with them. And we always want to make sure that our students can sort of see what we're trying to accomplish. I like to say, can your students see the forest through the trees? And I think, sometimes we have a tendency to, our students can get lost in the woods, and they get stuck in front of a big tree, for an analogy here. And that tree can be put there intentionally or accidentally sometimes, but that tree is sort of a barrier, an impediment to their learning. And they can't see around that tree and find their way out of the woods. So we want to help our students sort of elevate above the forest so they can see that clear path through the woods on the journey, and they don't get stuck by any one individual tree on that process. So how can we sort of, be reflective in our design processes and the way we're thinking about things? Can we challenge ourselves here? Why am I doing this? Do my students actually like this? Are they performing well on this assessment? Are they engaged here? Is there a better way I could go about doing this, or teaching this, or assessing this? And would I want to learn this way, or complete this assessment, or work through these processes? So, think about these things as you're looking to reimagine your course. And, if you're not sure of these answers, this is where we can start to ask AI and do and leverage tools like that in our iterative design process. And again, the idea of iterative design, just sort of a quick overview of this. The idea of iterations, constant iterations or changes, updates, new forms or versions of a course. Can't stress to you enough, I think the importance of the idea that our design work is never truly done. When we design a course, that doesn't mean we're done. That just means we have a version of that course to operate, in this section, or in this semester, or for this year. But we always want to be designing and updating and tweaking and making changes as we go. So the idea of iterative design is really sort of based on that idea of continuous improvement. How can we always be improving what we're doing for folks based on what we're receiving in terms of student feedback, learning outcomes, the needs, the evolving nature of our students, and the content that we're teaching, and the tools that we have available to us? And how can we use AI to support that process? Are there new variations or ways? Can we update content in the way we're presenting it? Can we create new, ideas for assessments, and for activities, and for feedback and rubrics, and all of these different things that we do in our course? let's kind of always be thinking about this as a nonlinear process, as a way that we can, take what we learn from something that's happening and apply it right away, and use empathy, and better define exactly who we're designing for and what their needs are, and generate new engaging ideas that we can put into our courses and use. So ultimately, we're testing and getting that feedback to find out what works, what we might be able to tweak or make better as we go. And when we use AI and leverage AI sort of as our co-pilot in this process, or like a teaching assistant to help us with some of that work, that's where I think the real value is. It's not that we're asking AI to do everything for us, but we're busy, right? We're trying to be efficient. There's only so many hours in a day, there's only so much we can do. How can we use some of these generative AI tools to help us be more efficient, to help us create better resources, to be sort of a partner in ideation and brainstorming as well? We can use the AI tools to bounce ideas off of or ask for suggestions and things of that nature. And that's what we want to constantly be doing. Again, UDL is something that hopefully folks are familiar with. This is the broadest of broad overviews on it, but it's important, I think, as we get into prompt engineering and thinking about using AI, and why we're using it and how we're using it. I always like to refer to universal design for learning as sort of the North Star of everything that we're doing in design work. That is sort of the guiding principle. It is the thing that we want to be using and focusing in on. And universal design for learning is a way that we can make sure that our learning experiences are working for all of our students. And we're recognizing that no two learners are exactly the same, and even the same learner is not going to learn two different things in the same way. So we want to design for variability. We want to design for flexibility. We want to design for multiplicity. Again, those big box stores that we talked about at the beginning, they were very one size fits all. Everybody had to go at the same time frame to the same store, walk in the same door, and access the same products. And that faded. That's not what people want or prefer anymore. Some do like that, and we can still offer some of those, within our course. But the idea of UDL is having things available, at the tip of your fingers when you're ready to do it, when you want to engage in it, in the way you want to do it. So that's more of that online shopping as well. And offering those types of options is really helpful for students. In the idea of universal design for learning is, can we provide multiple ways to engage students? So are there different hooks, if you will? Is there different pacing plans? How are we going to motivate and interest our students to do the learning and complete the work? Are there multiple ways we can represent the information to our students? Some students might want to read a textbook. Some might want to watch a podcast. Some might prefer to explore and research online and through different internet sources, or watch a YouTube video. Can we offer these different tracks of learning where students can engage, ultimately with the same ideas, but in different platforms and formats? And then the how of the learning. How are students going to present to us and express to us? What actions can they take to show us that they have in fact learned? And how can we assess their knowledge, skills, and abilities as it relates to the content? And that's a key thing, I think, in distinction to make sure we're always thinking about here is, it's important that we find out if our students met those learning goals, objectives, outcomes. Did they learn the content and the material? Not, are they a good test taker? Or are they a good writer? Or are they good at this particular activity? So if we can provide choice and different options, and that doesn't mean that there has to be an unlimited number of options for every assessment, or even different options for every single assessment, but throughout your course, I can't stress enough the importance of assessing folks in different ways so that they can focus on the content and not focus on the medium in which they're presenting their knowledge and understanding. So as we get
You're not
into, I
having
think,
fun yet?
yeah. So as what we'll get into here is, the idea of AI, and as we get into starting to use AI, just, real quick, any questions, anything I can go over that we've touched on to this point, just a spot where we can kind of take a breath here. Okay, and again, we'll have some more time at the end. If you want to throw those questions in the chat or connect after, we certainly can as well. So, as we get in here and talk about and think about generative AI and what we're trying to accomplish. Very, again, broad overview. I think we're in a much better spot and understanding of what generative AI. I hope all of you have explored this in some capacity here. But we want to use these AI tools, right, to generate content, resources, information. They can do a lot of things because these models these large language models are created in a way that they're going to essentially research and find those patterns in data and words. And I always like to think of it as having a conversation with the fastest learner in the world. So, as we think about what can generative AI do for us, it really can do almost anything. We just have to ask it in the right way. So if you sort of coach the AI tool along the process and think of it as a person on the other side of the screen that isn't really sure what you want, but the more you direct it and tell it what you want, what you need, what you expect, the more it's going to be able to go out there and learn from everything that's available to it and come back with an answer for you or an option for you or choices. So, thinking of that, it's just like if you were teaching, a student, you want to sort of guide them along with those guiding questions and providing key ideas and information, because the more information you give your students, the more they're going to be able to understand what's expected of them and be sort of on track and work through this learning process. And that's how we want to think of generative AI tools as well. Again, that idea of, can we use them sort of as a teaching assistant or a co-pilot here? Don't ask it to do all the work for you and just walk away, but kind of coach the AI tool through that process, just like you would if you had that teaching assistant and you were tasking the teaching assistant with things, and you'd tell them and give them instruction and specific directions for what you were looking for. And if they came back with something that wasn't quite what you wanted, you would give them feedback and send them back off to do it again. And that's the way we want to think of talking to these generative AI tools and using them as well. And we'll get into some prompt engineering here. And again, I think that idea of being conversational is the most important piece to this puzzle, that we get better outputs when we have better inputs. So the AI tool can only do what it's asked to do. So the more specific and detailed and clear you are with your prompts and the inputs that you put in, the better results that you're going to get. And you're never sort of stuck or with a finished product on those first outputs that you get from the AI tool. It's always about iterating. The iterative design process that we talked about, we can use and apply here with our conversation with the AI tools. So when you get a response from ChatGPT, for instance, it's okay to say, that's not quite what I was looking for. I was really hoping for this, and have it go back and do a little more. Or, that looks great, but, the language is a little wordy. This is too long. Can you put it in simpler terms and make it shorter? We can always ask for more things and for more specific prompts as we go. But again, the more detailed, the more clear we are throughout this process, and the more we sort of keep tweaking it, the better we're going to get at the end of this process. Again, that idea or that phrase or motto or saying of garbage in, garbage out, comes true here. So think about what you're putting in, what you're asking, and you're going to get better results from these tools to help you be efficient in that process. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do here. We want to reimagine our courses. We want to update and do this a little bit better. How can we do that efficiently? And prompt engineering is a key piece of that. So if we think about, specific examples here of a prompt, if you're working on, creating a writing assignment here, how can we really guide a prompt? What are the types of things that we might want to put in there? And so a simple but poor prompt might be, create a writing assignment on the American Revolution, right? Maybe we're teaching a history class and we want to, come up with a new assignment here. When we just ask it to create a writing assignment on the American Revolution, we'll get a response. It'll be a writing assignment on the American Revolution, but it's probably not going to be exactly what we want it to be or as good as it possibly could. So how can we write effective prompts? One of the things that I always try to do, even if I just need or want one writing assignment, I'm going to ask for at least 3 options, because that makes the AI tool think. It gives me different options, but it helps me to think and brainstorm which of those ideas I like, or maybe there's a way to combine bits and pieces of each of them. but it's giving me a more diverse perspective on what this could ultimately look like. So, things like generate 3 options for a writing assignment for a college level US history course. So we're giving the tool some information about who our target audience are and who our learners are on the American Revolution, and what do we want them to do? It's what's important based on our course learning outcomes and the things that we're trying to teach our students and have them demonstrate. So we want to ask our students to analyze primary sources. We're making use of, Bloom's taxonomy and critical thinking skills, higher level thinking skills with analyze. We want our students in and looking at primary sources. So we're telling the generative AI tool that we want an assignment where that's there. Again, there's no mention of primary sources in this first prompt, so maybe we'll get something with primary sources, maybe we won't. We talked about UDL and how important that is. I almost always will include something along these lines of make use of UDL principles in all of my prompts, because ChatGPT or the other tools, they know what universal design for learning is, but they might not always be thinking to apply that. But if we just tell them to make use of those UDL principles, that is going to inform the outputs that we're getting. And ultimately, we want to be making use of those universal design for learning principles. So let's have the generative AI do that for us. I would like to do something that I really like to do is sort of input current versions of assignments or things that I'm really looking for. So I might input and say, here, use this current version of an assignment as a guide. This is what I'm doing right now. Here's the writing assignment I have for the American Revolution, but I want to update it. I want to apply best practices to assessment designs. I'm trying to consider important things for my modern learners. I'm trying to reimagine my course. So here's what I have. Use this as a guide. I want something along these lines, but I'm trying to make it better. So we're telling the tool to do that. And then something that we're all sort of, aware of or concerned about throughout all of our assessments now, I think, is are students using generative AI to complete the work? And, is there a way to sort of AI proof assignments? No, probably not completely, but you can ask AI to think about the student's use of AI on a particular assignment, which might give you better, assignments that are going to more and better test a learner's ability to think independently and not just plug in a simple prompt to ChatGPT and get a paper generated, for instance. So can we say right in this, consider ways to avoid students being able to use generative AI to fully complete the assignment for them? And then we might even do things, something else that I've liked to do is like attach either my syllabus or the course learning outcomes, the course description, things like that to the generative AI tool so it can learn and get a better picture about what we're trying to accomplish, who we're trying to accomplish for. Again, if you were to go to an instructional designer on campus and ask them to create an assessment for you, they would want to know what course is this for? What have your students been struggling with? What do you really want to accomplish here, right? There would be several questions that instructional designer would ask you, and they would likely go look up that course description, see what your course looks like to help guide what they come up with for you as in terms of an assessment. So think of that as well here as you're prompting the AI tool. Give it the information about your course, who you are, who your students are, and what you're trying to accomplish, so we can better help that tool understand the needs and create, again, a better output. And so what can we use or how can we use this, right? We're thinking about prompt engineering. That's an example of a potential assessment, but what are we going to use this? How can we use this? Where do we start? And I think the idea here is to start small. There's so much that we can do, but just sort of get your toes into the water, if you will, and give yourself an opportunity to get started with this. Maybe it's just a single assignment that you're going to update. Maybe it's a single discussion board post or a quiz or an assessment, but get yourself in to start working through. Again, we're reimagining. Is there a particular assessment that students continually struggle with? Or the participation level and completion rate is lower. Maybe that means they're not engaged and students are confused or they don't like an assignment. That might be a good one to start trying to update or change, because again, it's not that if students don't complete something, we don't even get the chance to find out what they know and don't know. They just haven't completed it. And that's, I think, a real downside of that. And we want to make sure that, our students are doing the work so we can find out where they're at, so we can continue to teach them, and they can ultimately learn. So let's find ways to get them engaged in doing that. Again, the use of universal design for learning can really help with that. Whenever you get these sort of outputs and suggestions, the idea of testing that, bounce it off a coworker, a faculty member, a peer, ask maybe a student that's in a class right now, hey, what would you think about this as a potential assignment? There's always good ways to get feedback and help sort of guide you to finding the best opportunity and best options. And then again, we're going to adjust our assignments based on the feedback and responses. And sometimes the best feedback we get is no feedback at all. Again, if students are not completing something, that's probably a good spot to start. If they're completing it but really struggling with it, again, that's another spot to start. Those are friction points that we can try to adjust and work on, and listen to what your students are telling you, whether they're explicitly telling you that, or if that's an inference that we can make from the data or from what we're seeing or feeling. Where are the struggle points and how can we make those better? And it just has to start with, one thing at a time. It's not that you have to fully redesign your entire course. You're likely doing a lot of things very well, but how can we maybe make a few small changes along the way? And we could do that with objectives and essential questions. So, maybe you have course learning outcomes that are set sort of holistically and broadly for your entire course. And those are maybe even set by the institution. Maybe you have some say over those, maybe you don't. But are there ways to improve those, or are there ways to really break those down? So if we have these, broad learning outcomes for our course, are there ways to create smaller, more succinct and clear learning objectives and essential questions that help scaffold the learning and provide students with a direction and sort of the playbook of where we're headed to go? So, for an example here at the bottom, we might have a course learning outcome that students will understand ethical issues in cybersecurity, very broad. But is there ways to maybe more clearly define that objective, or if we can make that a new course learning outcome, we could try, or maybe we just have a more clear objective in a unit in which we're working towards that course outcome, where we're asking our students to evaluate real world examples of cybersecurity breaches to identify ethical dilemmas. So we're getting more specific and more clear. The idea of essential questions is something that I think can really help your students. This is something that you can really use AI to help with. If you have those learning goals and objectives, the course level objectives, you can ask AI to create essential questions for each of those. And these are the types of things that might help a student sort of process through a single lesson. Maybe you have an essential question for today's lesson in in-person course or this week's module. These are guiding sort of questions along the way, where if the student can answer these essential questions, they'll ultimately be able to meet that course learning outcome. So think of those essential questions as important things that students should answer and think about during the learning journey. Again, it's sort of like giving them a map or a playbook for where we're headed and what we're trying to accomplish. So those should be very specific. How should we balance privacy and security in the digital age? We're starting with that, and we're building to the objectives and the outcomes that we have. And AI offers a great opportunity to create those essential questions, and then we can use those essential questions to sort of inform our learners of today's objective or this unit's essential questions and objectives to help guide the learning process. Can we reimagine our assessments? This is, I think, a really great way and practical use of your time. We gave sort of an example in the prompt engineering slide of what that might look like, but we've likely have assessments that we've been using. But again, are there ways to reimagine them, to apply those principles of universal design for learning, to reach more of our students in a more engaging and authentic way? So can we use the AI tools to generate new, engaging, authentic assessments that are giving students more maybe practical real-world experiences and helping students be more involved in their learning process? Are there ways to offer multiple formats for, again, the students to demonstrate their learning, those principles of UDL? We've been asking them to write an essay here for years, but could we have them record a podcast or make a video or develop an infographic or a poster or something along those lines? Again, they might be able to share and demonstrate they have the knowledge, skills, and abilities in different ways. And when we give them something that they're comfortable with or engaged by, we're more likely to get better work. We're more likely to see that learning and have that engagement and completion rate, which is important. Can we really get to promoting higher order thinking, right? We talked very briefly about Bloom's taxonomy, something I encourage you to look into more. It's more than just, that idea of remembering and memorizing vocabulary words and taking multiple choice tests, but how can we promote higher order critical thinking? How can we get our students really involved in seeing connections among ideas and how they bring together the broader picture when they're analyzing things? And can we get them in there and evaluating and sort of assigning value to these ideas and developing arguments to support those decisions and stands that they're taking? Really getting them in there to think about those things. So we might ask, the ChatGPT or the tool to say, I have this current assessment. I'd like to make it a more critical thinking assessment. I want to make this more authentic. I want to offer multiple formats or versions of this assessment to engage students using UDL. These are all things that we can ask AI to do for us, and we can get those responses. And you might find things you like, you might find things that you don't want to use, and that's okay, but we're asking the right questions of the tool. We can also continue to sort of work to reduce the risk of plagiarism and cheating. You can be sure that your students are using AI. I think we can all pretty much come to a consensus that's happening. And how do we deal with that is sort of the question. Not if they're using it, it's how do we sort of deal with it. So are there ways that we can, encourage the use of AI for students when they're completing assignments? So it's not sort of this taboo thing we're telling them not to do. It's saying, hey, go to AI and do this, and then bring back to me that conversation that you had with AI. So we can sort of embrace their use. And again, we're getting more authentic assessments because we're seeing what they can do along the way, rather than just saying, don't do that. That's cheating. That's bad. And we all know it can be difficult sometimes to prove that AI was used, right? Those AI detection softwares are not where we'd like them to be. Sometimes, of course, we can sort of see it. What we know and what we can prove are two different things sometimes. But embracing the idea that your students are going to use AI, embracing the idea that that's out there, and developing new, more authentic assessments that, if they use AI for parts of it, that's okay. That's maybe, again, encouraged. We can still learn when we're using AI. It can help us be more efficient. Maybe you can do more, ask your students to do more because they can be more efficient using AI, just like you can be more efficient with your design and your redesigns of your course because you have that AI teaching assistant like we talked about. And then the idea of quizzes. I have quizzes sort of in parentheses here if you're a Brightspace user, which I suspect most of us here are. Everything is a quiz in Brightspace, right? But how can we sort of reimagine what we're doing with quizzes? Can they be short, simple, formative assessments that help us form an understanding of student learning throughout the process? They're lower stakes, and we might be able to develop these formative assessments or quizzes very quickly and easily using AI. We can say, here's the PowerPoint slides for my lecture. Can you create a short 5-question check for understanding quiz? And now you can plug those questions into Brightspace or your learning management system, and students can take that quiz to see if they're on track, see where they need to go back and review. Or it could be more of those summative, in summary of learning type tests and exams. Again, they're still called quizzes in Brightspace, but they could, be those bigger, larger, higher stakes type assessments. So, if we already have those, can we make new questions so we have larger test banks? Again, a way in which We can avoid students cheating. Maybe different sections have different versions of quizzes, or you have 5 versions of the same question, and you can set Brightspace to randomly pull one version of that question into each assessment, so students have a more difficult time cheating. If that's a concern for you, that's something you can do. And if you already have sort of your one version of that test or question, you can prompt AI to create 3 or 4 more versions of this question while assessing the same topic in the same level of difficulty or rigor, things of that nature. You might also consider taking quizzes or tests that you have and plugging those into AI tools, and then asking the AI tool to generate a study guide based on those quiz questions. So maybe that gives you a new way to help your students study or prepare for an assessment, gives you an idea of what maybe you can do in a review lesson, things of that nature. And then again, another idea is students are using AI. So for an assignment, maybe rather than giving them a quiz or a test, a multiple choice test, maybe you give them an assignment where they have to go out and use AI to generate quiz questions. This is something that I like to do, where the student goes through a unit or a course and say, okay, make me a 20-question test that has scenario-based multiple choice questions, and then provide me an explanation for why the right answer is the right answer. And now the students have to sort of think a little bit differently about things. It's not just memorizing and studying to regurgitate information and answer questions, but now hopefully they're sort of flipping the way they look at it, and they've got to develop and create those questions around a particularly important topic from the course. And AI can help them do that as well. We can use AI to help us reimagine the feedback that we're giving to our students. So, I highly encourage you to make use of rubrics that are aligned to UDL principles and your course learning outcomes in all of your assessments. Rubrics are wonderful to help students know what's expected of them, to help us keep consistency within the grading process. But they can be time consuming and difficult to create. But with AI tools, it's very, very easy and efficient to create these rubrics, and the feedback, the different levels, how we want to divvy up the points and things of that nature as well. So you can get that information from an AI tool, you can get it into the LMS, and you can have rubrics for your assignments. Strongly encourage you to do that. We can also use AI to help develop some feedback templates. So generally speaking, there's sort of consistent things that our students struggle with on assessments. Sometimes we can create feedback that's relative to that and sort of have it on standby. So we can copy and paste it over and use it as needed, but it helps us be more efficient, so we can be specific with our feedback. We can provide resources and action steps for students to continue their learning, and we can get that feedback back to them in a timely manner. We might develop examples or different ways to help students work through those struggles and friction points. And then we can also, again, with the idea of rubrics, maybe there's some guiding questions we can give our students to help them self-evaluate or peer-to-peer evaluate and guide that sort of process to look at their own work before they submit it or even after. We can use AI to reimagine our content as well. Again, you might be presenting resources and materials, you might have some information there, but are there ways to do this better, to provide an alternative version of that? Again, we're constantly trying to update and improve our courses. And again, this is there's a lot that can go into this, but find the topics your students struggle with and ask AI to help you build content around that, so you can provide them with more ways to learn that material. The legal and ethical considerations is always something that I think comes up with using AI, and I'm not here to tell you what the answer is to that. It's just something to be aware of. We certainly don't have the time to get into this too deep today. But generally speaking, when you create something in AI, you own that. The AI tool doesn't own that, so you can use that. I would encourage you to sort of, have an attribution in your courses or your materials that some of these materials were developed with the assistance of an AI tool, something along those lines. Again, we're embracing that. I don't think that you don't lose credibility by saying that. If anything, you sort of gain credibility by saying that. I think that's something that folks are aware of and are expecting. Our learners don't think you know less if you used AI here. They're going to appreciate that you are using AI, I think. And if you're concerned about plagiarism from the student end or from your end, if you use it, you're not sure if you can use what's there, those types of things. Again, these are questions that are best answered by your particular institution. But be aware of what's there, how to attribute it, how to use it, and recognize that if you're prompting and you're getting in depth into this process, that it's yours, and that's okay to use what you've developed in AI and share that. So I am gonna just in the chat throw some links to some resources to learn more about some of these topics, because I know, again, I went through fast, but you might be interested in kind of learning a little bit more about some of these. So those links will get you to that. I'm happy to share these slides. If you want to send me an email, I'll put that slide up here because I know we're running out of time. And if we have a minute, we can certainly open it back up for questions.
Dan, we do have our next presenter starting at 11:15 here, so right now. So if you
Okay,
do me a favor and put your LinkedIn and your email into the chat in case anybody has any questions.
I certainly will.
Oh, perfect. It looks like your email's there, and if you want to put your LinkedIn there too.
I will. Yeah.
Perfect.
All right. Thank you all so much for being here. I appreciate it.